This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you click on the link in the description below, it'll take you to their store and they'll know I sent you there. Hello everyone, I'm Nitsa Hone, and it is Wednesday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10. Most of the time, I use objective data from Magic's competitive history to rank cards or groups of cards in these videos. However, from time to time, I change things up a little bit and do a video that is based purely on my opinion, and this is one of those. In this video, we're going to look at 10 cards that are so weird, either in terms of what they do, their art, or their flavor, that they feel like they belong in a silver-bordered set. Silver-bordered sets are things like Unglued, Unhinged, and Unstable, sets that intentionally print joke cards that do incredibly strange things. There are also some silver-bordered holiday promos that fall into this same category. In other words, this list is my 10 picks for cards so wacky that they could appear in a silver-bordered set or a silver-bordered promo, and no one would be surprised by their inclusion. Before we get to the list proper, there is one honorable mention. And that's Steam Flogger Boss. A few years ago, the boss would have appeared very close to the top of this list, maybe even at number 1. Why? Well, because it had a bunch of text that was largely meaningless. Sure, if you have a changeling, it counts as a rigger, so that matters, but there was nothing called a contraption in Magic at the time, nor was there a keyword action called Assemble. The reason for all of this weirdness is the fact that this was printed in Future Sight, a set that showed us some possible futures for Magic. One of them was the frame you see here. Steam Flogger Boss wasn't the only card in the set to reference something non-existent that would appear later. Tarmogoyf did as well, mentioning both Planeswalkers and Tribal as card types, even though they didn't exist at the time. The difference is that Tribal cards and Planeswalker cards appeared shortly after Tarmogoyf did. Meanwhile, Steam Flogger Boss went more than a decade before contraptions or assembling were a thing, so this would have been a perfect inclusion on the list, but the reason it doesn't make the list is it actually has been reprinted in a silver-bordered set in Unstable. It's actually printed with a black border because the silver border is supposed to mean this isn't tournament legal, and technically Steam Flogger Boss is tournament legal because of its first printing, but the set it appears in, Unstable, is a silver-bordered set. And finally, with Unstable, we had contraptions and the Assemble keyword action. Steam Flogger Boss is a great example of a card that was printed in a legitimate standard legal set that would have felt normal with a silver border, and in the end, that's pretty much what happened. Steam Flogger Boss became a card in a silver bordered set after having been a legitimate tournament legal card that didn't really make any sense. The other cards on this list are similarly wacky, and maybe someday they'll be reprinted too in a silver bordered set. So, at number 10, I have Jackalope Herd. This one is an inclusion mostly because of the art and name of the card. There are lots of other cards that have wacky art or names, and I sort of have Jackalope Herd here as a stand-in for all of those, as I wanted to dedicate the majority of this list to really weird effects. So, what's so weird about a jackalope? Well, it's a creature that is famously known as a hoax and has become a big part of pop culture. People take taxidermy rabbits and put deer antlers on them as proof throughout the United States and Canada, especially in the southwestern United States, but pretty much everyone knows that it is a joke at this point. Wizards intentionally printed a joke creature here, and that's the kind of thing they like to do with silver-bordered cards. Anytime anyone sees this card, provided they have a sense of humor, this is going to make them smile because of that context. At number 9, I have Goblin Oriflamme. Similar to Jackalope Herd, I don't have the Oriflamme here because it does something weird. I have it here because of the humorous reference to Magic's past that it makes. Just as humorous creatures appear on silver-bordered cards, tongue-in-cheek references to Magic's past also appear in unsets. While Modern Horizons wasn't technically an unset, the set does have tons of cards that reference Magic's past. It's actually something I have covered in an entirely separate MTG Top 10, but of that group I like this one the most, so it is sort of a stand-in for all the funny card references in Modern Horizons. In this case, Wizards is referencing the original misprint of Orcish Oriflamme back in Alpha, when they accidentally printed it for only 1 in a red when it was supposed to be 3 in a red. Obviously now, the problematic misprinted version doesn't even seem that powerful, but making a reference to one of Magic's earliest controversies that was created by a misprint is pretty funny here. At number 8, I have Naked Singularity, which, like the rest of the cards on this list, makes it here largely because the effect it has is so weird. Frequently, silver-bordered cards have effects that completely change the rules of the game and create chaos, and that's certainly what Naked Singularity does. Making all the lands in play produce different colored mana is pretty wacky, even if the card it appears on isn't all that good thanks to having the dreaded cumulative upkeep mechanic. Even the art here feels like it could be part of an unset. At number 7, I have Warp World, the first of several red cards to make the list. Red is the color that most exemplifies chaos, so it makes sense that red has more cards than any other color that feel like they would be right at home with silver borders, and Warp World is definitely one of those. It does exactly what its name implies. It warps the game board entirely. Everybody loses all their permanents, and then they're all randomly replaced with cards from the top of everyone's library. You never really know what's going to happen when you cast this, and it is especially wacky if you're playing in a huge multiplayer game. Reshaping the board in such a random and chaotic fashion makes it feel like this could easily be printed with silver borders. At number 6, we have Scrambleverse, another red card that randomly reshapes the board. While it doesn't also include lands the way Warp World does, it does include all other permanents in its effect, and it randomly gives permanents to players. This might seem a little less chaotic, especially in a 2-player game than Warp World, as there is a chance that you hold on to some of your permanents, but this effect is equally insane in a multiplayer game. Just trying to find a way to keep track of everything is a headache. At least with Warp World, the cards go into the library before all the craziness happens. At number 5, I have Mage's Contest, another red card that creates chaos. I think this is even weirder than Scrambleverse or Warp World because both of those cards at least have you do something that happens sometimes in Magic. People gain control of each other's permanents all the time, and shuffling cards into your library and then putting things onto the battlefield for free is chaotic, but it is still something that feels like you're playing Magic. Mage's Contest and really all the top 5 cards on this list make you feel like you're playing a different game because what they do is so odd. Mage's Contest creates an auction that determines whether or not you're going to get to counter a spell where the currency is player's life. Like a lot of these cards, it gets increasingly crazy in a multiplayer game. I do think this card has a very cool design since it makes all players really consider their decisions, and the auction element is certainly something unique, but I think all of that makes this a really weird card and one that could easily appear with silver borders if it was given some wackier art. At number 4, I have Liar's Pendulum, another card that, like Mage's Contest, sort of creates a minigame. When you activate the pendulum, you name a card, and your opponent has to guess whether or not that card's in your hand. If they guess wrong, well, you get to draw a card. This thing is super weird, but I guess if you're really good at lying or bluffing, this card might do a pretty good job of helping you draw extra cards. The little minigame this has you play feels like it came right out of a silver-bordered set. At number 3, I have Shahrazad, a famously weird Magic card that is one of the few cards completely banned in Vintage. It is banned, not for power reasons, but because the card is so weird and can make games last forever. Basically, Shahrazad has you leave the game you are playing behind, and then you and your opponent grab what is left of your decks and play an entire additional game. Then when the game is over, whoever loses that sub-game loses half the life they had in that original game. Shahrazad makes you play a game within a game, which is a very weird effect and one that these days seems out of place anywhere but a silver-bordered set. At number 2, I have 2 cards, the so-called Dexterity cards, Chaos Orb and Falling Star. Like Shahrazad, they are also banned in Vintage, a format with very few banned cards. Both of these ask you to do something that just isn't even remotely part of Magic these days. You flip the card over the battlefield and you get some type of effect based on the card or cards that your orb or star lands on. Chaos Orb was the more powerful of the two and was actually seeing a ton of play. But players started actually reshaping their game board, putting all their permanents far away from each other and the like, in an attempt to keep more than one thing getting Chaos Orbed. There's even stories of people trying to move their cards out from underneath the Chaos Orb as it's falling. There are also stories of people ripping up their Chaos Orb into small pieces and flipping it over the board to nuke everything. Something an actual uncard referenced, Chaos Confetti. So, if people spacing their permanents really far apart and ripping up cards and moving cards out of the way of a flipped card doesn't sound like someone is playing an unset, I'm not sure what does. Eventually, the cards were banned because it was just decided that what they did didn't feel like anything else in Magic. Both of these cards are on the reserve list, but very similar cards could easily be printed in unsets. At number 1, I have Goblin Game. I think this card is the weirdest one ever printed, at least that's been put into booster packs, and it is truly shocking it doesn't have a silver border. Even more shocking is that unlike some of the other cards near the top of this list that do weird stuff, like the Dexterity cards and Shahrazad, Goblin Game is still legal in Vintage and Legacy. It does cost 7 mana, but if someone finds a way to ever cast a Goblin Game in a Vintage tournament, things are going to get wacky. So what's so weird about Goblin Game? Well, the fact it has you play a minigame completely unrelated to Magic. At least with Shahrazad's game, you're still playing Magic, even if it is a sub-game. With Goblin Game, you're doing some truly weird stuff. The card instructs you and the other player or players to quickly hide objects and then reveal them to each other. Everyone loses 1 life for each object they hid, and then whoever was able to hide the fewest objects loses half their life. There's just so much going on here that makes this card not really make sense. For one thing, it doesn't really say how much time you have, whether you can leave where you are playing the game, what it means exactly to hide something, and so on. It just has people running around frantically, hiding things until the Goblin game is over. Having players play a mini-game and interact with objects outside the game altogether, not to mention the additional chaos this card brings, certainly makes it feel like it should have a silver border, and I don't think anyone would be surprised to see Goblin Game printed in our next unset. Well, that does it for today's MTG Top 10. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. What wacky cards do you think could show up in an unset? Let me know in the comments. If you want to make sure you catch future MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to see the almost 200 other MTG Top 10s I've already made, you should see the playlist now. Thanks for watching.